Steve Robertson, welcome to the Inside Out Leadership Podcast.
I've been waiting for this time, this opportunity for a long time, Rob. So excited to be with you today.
My goodness, whether you and I are talking informally, formally, it never matters in this way. We are who we are. We take ourselves with us wherever we go. We're bound to have some fun. We're bound to bring some insight. I've been greatly inspired by not only the work that you do and have done for quite so many years, but who you are. And I figured an appropriate place to start our dialogue, our conversation, Steve. I'm going to keep you on the edge of your seat a little bit. I want to make you sweat here in the Inside Out leadership space. But no, I figured to let people in a little bit more of who you are. Would you be willing and honor us by sharing maybe a brief story that would let our listeners in to who you are just a little bit more? What do you say?
I mean, for those who are listening, I'm already blushing. So thank you, Rob, for that.
He is. He really is. No.
If they can't see me, I'm blushing. Thank you for having me. I'm an old fellow already. Externally, internally, I feel like I'm 20, right? So like a story that my wife and family moved to the United States about 25 years ago. And something that predates that is a friend of mine, actually a mentor of mine, once said to me, Steve, there are two things that I really want you to take to heart. One, be on time. Value people, and one way you can do that is by being on time. And so I take that very seriously. But the other thing that he said to me is, what you need to really process and embrace is be interested and be interesting. And so we spoke about that a lot. And so what has that done, and why am I sharing that with you in that way, is because I've really worked hard at being interested in anybody that comes in front of me. And being interesting part has truly led from that. And so what I believe, from a story about me is I'm a serial connector, a serial networker. My heart, my passion is to meet people sincerely without an agenda. Well, actually, my agenda is I want to be interested and I want to be interesting. And what I've realized is that when I'm interested in people, it helps me be interesting because I can retell some of the stories of their journey and their successes and their failures. And so 25 years in the States, what brought me to the States was being connected, being networked, was being interested and learning as we go. And so I think that's something that I guess I would say drives me and is a story about me. I really work hard at connecting with people without an agenda. I'm not trying to sell something. I'm not trying to push any kind of agenda, but I am trying to be interested in who they are. And that never disappoints. And when people, I guess, see that you sincerely are interested in them, I think there's a real win there. But it does feel being interesting because I just have so many people around the country and around the world that I've been lucky to connect with that have just added such flavor and color to my life with their stories.
This is so good. All right. So I got to follow up by asking you this. So interesting and interested. So you'd mentioned something that jumped out to me, which is no real agenda. So many leaders, so many human beings for that matter, struggle because if they're really honest, there always seems to be, and again, in most people, most leaders, some hidden agenda. Like if someone does this for me, or if I do this for them, I'm hoping to get this out of it. It almost conditions placed on things. So is there anything practical that you've learned through your experiences, through who you are, that has helped you not have an agenda, to just be who you are, enjoy who they are, have this mutual exchange of life without being so that ... Is there anything that you do or that's helped you, leading up to the present day that really helps you enter in and stay in that space?
So I'll confess that I'm not batting 1,000 on this, right? I have certainly struck out on this a number of times. There have been times where I've reconnected or connected with someone because of some motive. But you know what has kept me focused in this space is sincerely a passion and a desire to to connect and get to know people. And I guess there's always an agenda. And so what my agenda has been is that there has almost never been a conversation with old or young that I haven't walked away from being better for that conversation, learning something that I can like,
Good.
oh, that's interesting. And so
Yeah.
it's a softish agenda, but as I have practiced this over the years, my heart has always just been to sincerely come alongside and love in a way, get to know someone. I love this movie Ender's Game. I don't know if you've seen Ender's Game.
No. Uh-uh.
See, watch it. And I'm going to blow a little bit of it, but it's about this young guy. It's futuristic, and he has to save the world, and he's playing a computer game by doing that, right? And so what he ends up doing, one line in the movie, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's paraphrased. He basically comes back down to earth while he's fighting this war. He thinks it's a simulation, but what he realizes is that by the time you really know your enemy, you end up loving them, right? And so that's like a really big thing in this movie, is because now he knows this enemy and how to potentially defeat them. But now he loves them because he knows them. And sincerely, what I've learned on the journey is, as you truly are interested in people, you learn to love pieces of them, and that's my motive. Because there's so much that goes on in our world on a day-to-day basis. Those moments of truly just loving people and knowing personally that there isn't really a hook, is what drives it. It drives me, and what I want to, I guess, close with that thought is that it just takes a little bit of time for people to realize that you don't really have an agenda, and I think that just changes your relationships, and relationships matter. And I think that's one of the few things that really matter in our lives is relationships. So I don't know if I answered your question,
Oh
but
my goodness, did you ever? For me, what I hear you emphasizing, at least in my own heart and mind, is remain a learner when you're with people. Like, so many times I think that when we're with people, it's what we can always offer them, like getting our point across, getting our area of expertise across. But if we remain in a place of humility and remain in a place of, I call it like a student's heart, always eager to learn something new, then certainly we have a lot to give, but we have a lot to learn at the same time. And then there can truly be a two-way communication line. And
yeah.
isn't any healthy and vibrant conversation is always a two-way communication line. So thank you, Steve, for bringing that up. Okay. I got to ask you this now, my brother. You've been influenced by so many people in your life. Okay. You have a lot of accolades. You have a lot of influence, a lot of impact with the next generation and people of all generations all around the globe. However, we know that you haven't done it alone. There's been people that have come alongside of you that have greatly influenced you. Who would you say is arguably one of the most influential people that you know? Like,
Wow.
that has really left such a, whether they're living today, whether they passed away, whether you know them up close and personal or a bit from afar, who has influenced Steve Robertson the most?
Wow. Rob, yeah, I'm going to disappoint you. I have come to understand that I'm a really complicated person, and and
Good, I'm
and
not alone.
the reason I'm saying that is that if I think very quickly, like who I've just got all these thoughts and ideas flashing through my head now. These people. The truth is, for me, I am so lucky that I have had so many people deposit something exciting and riveting and real in my life, that I have a list, and there's so many that have deposited, but they're all deposited in different ways.
Mhm.
That be interested and be interesting is a deposit from one person that I just haven't spoken to in a long time, but yet it stays with me so much. I've had people that just deposit these little vignettes. Sometimes it has been somebody at a hotel where I'm checking in, and sometimes it's been a lifelong friend that continues to speak into my life, and sometimes it's been Roger Federer just in an interview, right? Because I'm a tennis fan, and sometimes it's been the Eagles because I adore them and they're winning. And so, I can't think off the top of my head of one person, but I can promise you that when I say this is real, I've had so many people drop these little vignettes of nuggets into my life that I live by, and honestly, from young to old. And there's a kid. As coaching, I'm mentoring him, younger guy, and he just asked me the one question. He really said this: is that really true in a conversation where I was sharing an experience with him? That was his words. Is that really true, Steve? And I was like, oh. And it impacted me, right? It impacted me, and it was so poor answer probably, but the truth is I can't think of one person. I'm really blessed to have had a lot of people pour into my life in a whole lot of different ways and ongoing, because I've got a lot of work that needs to be done, right? So I'm fortunate that that's continuing to this day.
Would you know what that says to me about you is you just haven't and don't continue to learn from maybe one individual, a few individuals, that day in and day out, you're soaking in and being present with the one that's before you, of, and how much they have meant to you and how much they do mean to you. And not everyone does that, Steve. That's a perspective, a higher perspective that I want more of. And I know so many leaders around the world want more of too. So thank you for that. All right. So here's a legacy question for you.
Mm.
I know you are a person, you're a man, you're a leader of legacy. You believe in it. What is your legacy, or what do you want your legacy to be one day?
Sure. These are such big questions, right? It depends when you catch me, right? So after a tennis game, a tennis match, I want my legacy to be that I beat that person, and everybody must remember that. Okay. After a really good mentoring session with somebody, I want them to know that I was part of getting them onto a path, and in the team that I work with. But I think legacy sincerely is I where my heart is now and has been recently. When I say recently, I mean in the last 10 years or so. Is I want to be remembered for, and I'm working towards being in the space where I help people get a different perspective on life as we know it, or the life that they're journeying on. And this is not throw out the old, bring in the new. This is just a new lens to view things through, because a change in perspective always precedes a change in behavior or attitude. And I've seen that so much, where there's some really, really good things going on in my life, my business, my friend. And it's just that new perspective, because it's hard to get a new perspective, because not because we're set in our ways, but because things are working. And so if I have to think about my legacy, I would love someone to say of me that there was a perspective that I helped shift in their lives positively, right? And so maybe that would be it. And I haven't really thought about it, and I'm a little embarrassed to even try to unpack that, but that's, I guess, where my heart would go.
No, I appreciate that. I really, really do. So I want to do a deeper dive. You have a new book out. When was it released? From the time of this recording, was it about a month ago, a little over a month ago?
Yeah, just about a month ago, and it was by mistake, right? So we haven't even marketed it. It wasn't supposed to be released yet, and so yes, it's been out for about a month, and I'm so excited to say this. It's been received already in more than 20 countries around the world. So I am thrilled about that. Isn't that exciting?
It's amazing. So I'm intrigued in so many different ways, and I'm going to let everyone in on how much this book has already impacted me personally. I'm going to suspend that just for a moment or two. How did you come up with the brilliant name, Aliens Among Us, 10 Truths We Need to Know About Gen Z? Like, what? Aliens Among Us. When I share that with my kids, when I share that with other people, they're like, that is amazing. Yes.
That's awesome. The way we landed on that, and Colleen, my beautiful wife of many years, sounds like I'm on Wheel of Fortune now. I have a beautiful wife right? But it's true in my case. One of the things that it's perspective based, and in this journey of trying to catch people's attention, what I realized, one of the things that I had to navigate was every generation, and I'm not getting into that, I'm just using it to answer your question. Every generation looks at the youngest generation and thinks they're teenagers going through a phase. And what does that say? That says this. It says that at some point in time, you will snap out of that phase and you'll become like us, which my parents certainly thought about me. And they're like, oh, he's going through another phase. I thought it was only supposed to be one. My son in all these phases. And eventually I snapped out of it and became more like them. And they're like, oh, there we are. We've been waiting for you, right? And the point is that this generation is not just teenagers going through a phase. They're fundamentally different. And so one of the things that was really percolating was, how do I let people realize that they're not just teenagers going through a phase? And so that's where we came with this concept of aliens, not trying to belittle them in any way, but to say, if an alien sat down with me, I certainly wouldn't bring my history and say, do it like this. I would spend
So
time.
true.
Who are you? Do you eat mice? Do you eat humans? What do you eat? Do you eat, like, what do you like? Do you like things? And so we would take the time to connect with them and get a sense of who they are. And that's really my heart, is that we look at them like that, so that our motive is to connect and understand them differently, because they're not just teenagers going through a phase. So that's how we landed on that. And I also wanted to kind of shock people, say, like, what, they're aliens living amongst us? Yes, they are. And I don't want to give the end of the book away, but we end up being the aliens, not them.
There you go. No, that's brilliant. And I want to let everyone in on, I have read not the book in its entirety yet, but I've read enough. And Steve, I want to encourage you in this way. I have been deeply, and I don't say this too often, I have been deeply moved by the writing of your book. It's not only informative about the Gen Z generation, but I find myself being so much more empathetic towards them. As I'm reading, I'm being certainly educated, but my heart goes out to them. Like, my heart actually breaks for them. My heart's also happy for them, but it also breaks for them in ways that it's different for other generations. So thank you for that. Thank you for the gift that the book is. Thank you for the gift that you are in writing this very timely piece of work as well. So I want to highlight, you share 10 truths in the book about Gen Z. I want us to do a slightly deeper dive with truth one, because it's extremely foundational and sets the tone for the rest of the book. All right. And truth one is, Gen Z has been transformed by a perfect storm.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about that. We have a lot of listeners that are leaders of companies, but not only leaders of companies and organizations, whether it be non or for profit, some may be parents.
Yeah.
Gen Zs or even millennials. What do they need to know about truth one?
And that's my heart, is to reach leaders, and parents, because the foundational thought is that they're teenagers going through a phase. And in so doing, we're judging them and saying they're wrong. And a really bad analogy, and I'm confessing up front, it's a bad analogy, okay? Because
disclaimer, here we go.
It falls apart a little bit, but it is this: if we take a can of blue paint and we pour in some yellow paint, we know that it'll turn green, right? And so when you look at this perfect storm, every generation, for the sake of this analogy, before Gen Z is blue. And this perfect storm is adding yellow into this can of blue paint. And slowly but surely in the center, you see green emerging. Right. Now, if you look at the timing of this, Gen Z have only ever been alive during this green period. Right. But slowly but surely, the green is now taking over the whole can of paint, and everything is becoming green. But it isn't green yet. There's blue, and then there's a blend of yellow, and there's a blend of green. And so this perfect storm, when you look at it, is these factors of this perfect storm. Technology, we can spend an hour on each of them. Technology, world news, social media, parenting and leadership. And those are the 4 components that really have made this generation green before the other generations, because we're all going to slowly start to be impacted by the effect of this and turn green. And so that's the reality of this perfect storm, the realization that it isn't an attitude. That's why they're green. It's the forces and these are significant forces that have come to play on their lives. And it's the only forces that have ever played on their lives. So they aren't transitioning, they are. while we were in this process of transitioning. And so we can certainly dive into each of those because they're significant. I mean, you think world news and social media are similar. No, they're not at all. And they are significant. You think parenting and leadership? Well, yeah, of course, but there's so much more to each one of these things. And so as a quick cliff note, understanding that they're not different because they're trying to be different, but because they're actually wired differently really helps as a foundation to lead them better, to understand them better, and certainly to parent them better. And again, the thought is, well, we're trying to fix them. No. We want to be future-proof as parents, as businesses. 30% of the world, I've misspoken. 52% of the world population is under the age of 30. So they're already green. Okay, now Gen Z isn't all 30, they're a little younger, 27. But think about it. 52% of the world is already green. They came out of the box green, right? Yeah. So they're waiting for us to catch up, and they're not actually going to wait for us to catch up. So we're in that transitional process. But it's really important to get as a parent and as a leader, because it does challenge some of the mindsets that you bring to leading. And our intent is to lead well so our businesses do well, lead well so our employees do well and grow and upskill, lead well so our kids as parents do well. But I think it's a really important key, because if you don't have that key, the only key that we have is that they're teenagers going through a phase, which is not true.
Brilliantly stated. Two things that jumped out to me about Truth One as well, and I didn't know if you had any further insight or you want to dig a little deeper on either one or both of these areas, is empathy fatigue of the Gen Z generation. I mean, I guess Gen Z is what, 1996 through 2010? Is that about right?
Yeah, about 95 to 2010, about 12 to 27, but it depends where you ask. So yeah.
Okay. Depends where you are. So what you brought out in the book, at least for me, was, with all the TV and all the negativity and drama, that generation just grows up. They don't know anything different than they, have the news on their feed, on their phone, all the time, and all the negativity, and they're hit with so much stimulation, all these different things. And so much of it and what the world's putting out is negative because people are into drama. And drama sells, unfortunately, as we know. But that pays a toll on the Gen Z, and so in the midst of that, I think you mentioned it's empathy fatigue, and that can, really create them being tired. And also in the midst of all this stimulation, the second thing that jumped out to me was, if you look at even boredom due to overstimulation, but again, all these triggers, visual stimulation, all the different things happen all the time. And then all of a sudden, like two of my kids fit with under that, right? I have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old. And all of a sudden they have a moment to breathe and they get bored really, really quick. And it's like, what? Where I didn't have that problem because I was used to not being overstimulated in the same way they are. So I'm even trying to better relate to them. So any further insight as relates to either empathy fatigue, or boredom due to overstimulation?
Yeah, those are two deep things, right? And so what I found in the 5 years it took to bring this thing to print, and already there's there's so much I couldn't say, right? Is that it's a complicated story, and this is just a component of it. And what you see is this concept of world news and mean world syndrome, which was a cognitive bias that was studied in the 70s. In the 1970s, in the 1900s, can you imagine, how old that makes you feel? I was born in the 1900s. My kid's like, what? So in the 70s, and the premise of just that irrational fear of the world around you, and that's created by this constant barrage of news. You fast forward to today, and it, as you said, plugged in 24/7. And so what ends up happening really, really quickly is you see so many tragedies that at some point it brings you to tears, and then 2 days, 3 days later, more and more and more tragedies, you don't cry anymore. Now, I'm being silly by saying this, but if you're a mass murderer, the first time you kill somebody, I'm sure it's like crazy. But the second time, it's not so bad. Terrible analogy. I'm not a mass murderer, so I don't know.
I get your point. Well stated.
And so what you see is that when you've seen so many people getting shot, it's just a case of like, oh, okay, that's terrible. And that impacts our life in a massive way. These four broad concepts, which I didn't unpack in the book, but it's kind of what's happened in terms of how we've changed. We're navigating a journey where we value access over ownership, right? So it's that rental space concept, but that means a lot, right? So it means I can subscribe to something and then check out when I don't want it anymore, right? And so that frames your thinking, it frames your heart, your attitude to work, your attitude to relationships, attitude to everything. I'll buy it when I need it. When I don't want it, I'll turn it off. And then we have this awareness over action, which is starting to talk a little bit more about that. So we're aware of so much, but we just don't have the same amount of action to do something about it, right? And then we've got this fear over faith, which is really what we're talking about. And this is not a spiritual component or religious component. This is fear of the world, fear of leaders, fear of all those kinds of things, versus faith in the system, faith in your leaders, faith in your parents, and if you have a higher being. And then it's this information over understanding. And so those things are valued where we've got access to all this information, but they just don't know what to do with it. Now, the reason I'm unpacking that really quickly is that when you look at just this empathy muscle has been flexed so much that it is really hard to have empathy. Plus, unfortunately, one of the things, call it a giant, that we're navigating is that we're really celebrating focusing on self, right? And there's a degree of self that is really valuable to focus on, but there's a point where I think it's unhealthy, where it's only me or me first, regardless of anything else. And so when you look at that empathy and that focus on self, which truthfully COVID has amplified, you look at it when you drive, and you look at it in the post office when you're standing in a line, it's so abundant. And so that's tough. And it's really important to understand that, because it takes a time in a relationship to strengthen that muscle a little bit in terms of a relationship. So that's a really good reason to have that conversation. And then when you look at the boredom component, you look at this phone, the feed that is here available 24/7, and you look at the stickiness of it and how compelling and interesting it is. And you look at the mundane life at home. When my son comes home, it's like, oh, what's going on here? Nothing. I'd rather do that. The same thing is that empathy muscle. You've got your dopamine release, which is really good, by the way. We've been built in such a way that we need to do hard things because it releases dopamine in us, and that, that ability to strive and challenge. Well, the fully 24 connected gives us that dopamine release all the time. And so what ends up happening is that those dopamine receptors have just been flooded, and so they're just not sensitive anymore. And so what you've got this, I'm never bored, but truthfully, I'm never doing anything that's hard. I'm just being flooded with dopamine stimulators, right? But what happens there is that you become very quickly bored or dissatisfied with life, because we are built to strive, to grow, to be challenged, and do hard things. And so that replacement doesn't work. And the other thing that we've got to know about boredom is one of the most creative places you can be, because it's when you're in that space of boredom where you can start to really, really be creative. And so those two things that you brought up are really real and important. And so as a parent or a leader or a mentor, helping someone navigate that and understand that, helping them unplug. I'm not advocating unplugging, even though I'd love that, but it's not the reality of our world. Understanding what you're giving up and understanding what journey you're on in that space as a mentor or leader is just a really important part of helping people figure out their true identity, so that they can be not only happy, but be productive, and that you can lead them well.
So I want to share with everyone the real reason why I had Steve being interviewed today was for selfish reasons. It's like a coaching time for me. That's why, as we move into truth number 3, we spend a lot of time in that truth number 1, because it is so foundational, Steve. So thank you for taking us into that with some things that really leaped off the page for me, and I wanted to highlight to those listening. But truth number 3, I'm just going to state it here. Gen Z is energized by the power of technology, but suffers from tech fatigue. And I'm going to quote you. And then again, this is me. This is a coaching time for Rob now. And if others can listen in and also be impacted by it, which I'm sure will happen, we're all better for it. So you say in the book, on the home front, parents should understand that helping children unplug is key. Now, we understand in the real world what you just brought up. Not saying completely all the time. That's just not real. It's not how. But you go on to say the most effective way for parents to navigate this is for themselves to become the most compelling content in the lives of their children. Whoa. It's not about banning the screen, but about being more interesting, engaging, and exciting than the screen. Could you unpack that a little bit more for me and for all the other parents out there or aspiring parents out there, or make this applicable to even business leaders? But man, you had me at hello, the Jerry Maguire line on this one, Steve.
Well, first of all, let me say, whoever wrote that, that's gold. That is gold right there. I need to read that book. So that's genius. The world we live in today is an Instagram world. It's a world where everything is amplified and spectacular on a level that is incredible, right? And so what comes with that is challenging. I often read these articles about these huge CEOs of Apple and all the big guys, and like, my children won't be on social. I know how bad it is. And while that is completely true, you're divorced from the world that you live in and that your children are navigating. And so let me first say this. Millennials, we love them. They're like Windows Vista. Everybody wished it didn't happen, but it did. And so here they are. That's a joke. That's just a joke.
I love it.
Okay, so millennials are here, right? And so millennials, they had the internet and smartphones like really late in their journey. And so as a result, what happened with them was it was a toy, right? Lots of selfies, and we're discovering this new technology. Gen Z arrive, and it's there already. The toy phase is past, and now what we have is a tool. This tool is what they use to live life on a daily basis. And the truth is, every one of us does too, right? So the premise of unplugging is just not real. Right? It's just not real. We use it as a tool, and you can't live without that tool because it's so integral in terms of a part of our lives. But what we have to understand is that we have been, as leaders and as parents, we've been missing in action for more than a generation. We've been allowing our children to free range and grow up how they want. So we've had this, and we still have, these parents that have been really tough on their kids. You ask a child, what would you like to eat? I don't know, Mom, what would I like to eat? And then there's no backbone because the parents been so dominant. But then the flip side of that is that you have a child who rebels because they can't do that. And so now you come out to the millennials that have gone through some of that, and they're like, well, I just want my child to be what they want to be. There's good in both of those, right? And so where does that fall? Where does that fall in the middle? So what we have here is we've got these leaders and parents that have been missing. And so when you look at any child, or truthfully, even an employee arriving in the workplace, and you've got this kind of sink or swim, hands-off mentality, figure it out best as you can, what are you competing with as a parent? You're competing with a world of compelling, interesting, exciting information. I sit in the airport, and before I know it, I've scrolled for an hour watching arbitrary videos that I haven't paid attention to for 1 second, but yet, why? Because it is so compelling, and it's certainly more interesting. And this is a big statement than watching people walk up and down in the airport, because that in itself can be the most fascinating and interesting thing you can imagine. Watching people walk up and down and judging them as they walk around. Don't we all do that? Like, oh, can you believe that's what he's wearing? Those two are a couple. I could never, whatever we think, right? And so when you want to be meaningful and deliberately meaningful in someone's life, if you want to come alongside them, you have to understand what place you are vying to take. Because this is not just there's room, add to it. There is no room. Our lives are full. So we have to be substituted in. And what is going to come out of somebody's life to allow you in, to give you that permission? And so in so doing, you have to understand we live in a world that is glamorous and exciting. And you have to take the challenge to become that in your child's life for a moment, so that you can get an opportunity, permission, to be in their lives. Permission is required to be in anybody's life, even your 5-year-old. And so winning them over by being that compelling content, which means in many cases doing something different, engaging differently, changing the role that you typically play in the house, because that role is mundane and allows them to plug in, right? And so you've got to be deliberate, and it takes really deliberate thought, time, effort, and energy. But honestly, any good parenting and leadership does. It requires deliberate effort. That's where you see the results. It's like culture in a business. If you want a good culture, it needs deliberate cultivation. If you don't do that, a bad culture will grow on its own. And that's the same thing about being plugged in. Being plugged in will grow on its own if you leave it. But if you want to change that, it takes some deliberate steps.
Whew. I was talking to my wife about this very thing, because you just have a way about you, Steve, that brings it out within couples and family dynamics. I love it. And I said to Karen, that's her name, I said, we do a pretty good job creating experiences, talking about be more compelling than what the kids are observing or experiencing on their phones and on their computers. But I want to double down on that one. I think there's ways as a parent and as a business leader to where I can create and develop even better experiences, not just information where it goes from mind to mind, but I want to be living and breathing example of, who I am, certainly the content on my heart. So when I'm with my kids or I'm with my strategic partners, I'm with my team members, that I'm burning with so much passion and so much enthusiasm for people and for life that they're bound to catch on fire being around me. So that's what you're doing. You're putting more fuel on the fire. So thank you, Steve. Okay. As we move
along. One quick example, Rob, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, please.
It just happened. A friend of mine was asking me that same question or similar question around his kids. And so we're just chit-chatting a little bit, and he's got two youngish kids. And he's telling me what they're going to be doing over Christmas. And, they go out and they do this thing where they feed people, and then they go out for takeaways and, whatever the case. And we're talking about the skill sets, the muscles that they really want to develop, this invisible curriculum. And so we come up with this idea is like, well, what happens if you take the money that you were going to spend on takeouts and you put them in two envelopes and you hide them somewhere in the house? Okay. And you say to your kids, here's the deal. Okay. We're going out for takeouts tonight, but you have an hour and a half to find your money. Okay? Now, perseverance, problem solving, two of the muscles that need really to be developed amongst gratitude and communication. Go and find it. And so as we're busy unpacking this conversation, we go the next level. Like, okay, so now they find it, or one of them finds it. Does the other one help the other one? Right? Or what happens if they don't find it? And I'm like, you know what? They're not going to die if they don't have dinner tonight. Right? But what a crazy cool lesson to teach them. And so it's the simple little things that don't need to be massive that you can do that can maybe make it compelling, because I can guarantee you this: one finds it, the other one doesn't. The one eats, the other one doesn't. And I'm not advocating that. I'm playing out a scenario, right?
Of course not, Steve.
That is a story that will be told at many dinner tables, which is compelling.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Leaders, let's be creative in creating experiences that last. All right. So we've talked about two of your truths, but before we land this plane, Steve, I got one more question. I got a couple more as we land the plane, but one more question as it relates to a lot of what we've talked about. We've geared our attention to in this conversation of how we can better connect to the Gen Z, understand who they are more, how they operate, how they function, so we can be more proactive in going to them, understanding, engaging with them, connecting with them, etc. What we haven't talked about as much, how do we help them better understand us? How do we, if we take a step towards them and embrace, genuine connection is we want them to take a step towards us as well, right? Anything that we can do as parents and leaders that would foster that would inspire that. Because if I'm always the one, or we're always the one reaching out and embracing and trying to understand, but maybe they aren't chomping at the bit in which to do so, is there anything that we can do that will help them better receive who we are?
That's a beautiful and huge question. And so let me do my best in giving you my thoughts in that. First of all, please recognize that as we live in an Instagram world, our currency of the day's influence. That is the currency that we trade with, right? And so what we have is a generation that are mentored almost entirely by their peers, which means the older generations have to be really special to be allowed into Gen Z's life. Not only as a teenager, like, what do you want, Dad? Beat it. Like, I'm hanging out with my friends. And you don't have to be a bad kid to be that. That's just being a teenager, right? And that space that you want to be. But here's what we have to see. We have to see that as influence is key, you have to bring influence to a conversation in order to be allowed into that conversation. And so what does influence look like? What does it result in? It results in permission. And once you have permission, you can speak into someone's life. So what you have to have, and where this becomes reciprocal, because to a point it's not reciprocal, it's give, give, give. Think about your child when they're born, feed me, feed me, feed me, pay for this, pay for this, pay for this. And at some point it becomes reciprocal, or maybe never, but then they leave home at some point, right? That's exactly like any leadership journey. I want, and at some point there's a reciprocal component in. But in order to get to that, what we have to see is this. We have to see that if you are not in the business of upskilling your child, your employees, that conversation will never happen. So the what's in it for me kind of mindset, which sounds really selfish though I'm saying it, but the truth is, if you are not upskilling your child in some form or fashion all the time, bite-sized experiences that upskill them, that grow them, specifically, easy way to do it is in those four soft skills that I've already mentioned. But there's many other ways. If you do that, the game changes, because as soon as you realize that that person has something of value to give you, you now give them permission to speak into your life. And at that point, it becomes reciprocal and works both ways. You see, I have to acknowledge that the diet I'm about to go on is in fact going to help me lose weight before I commit to that diet, right? And so in the same way, Gen Z has to recognize that you bring value and that your motive is pure, because there's been a lot of motives that they've seen, right? Before they allow you in. And once they do, what you start to get access to is the most creative, innovative generation we have ever seen. You also get access to the generation that is determining what is bought and sold, how it's bought and sold, and even what is valued tomorrow. And if you want to be a business leader and parent tomorrow and you don't know that, well, you probably will be the Blockbuster and not the Netflix.
Woo, believe it or not, we end where we started. As we spend time with Gen Z, add value to who they are, what they want to do, with no strings attached. See, and what you said earlier on, the very beginning of our conversation, you love to have no agenda other than getting to know, connecting with, and learning from. And wow. So I just want to say, Steve, this has been a very powerful time for me personally. The moment that, I reached out and said, hey, would you be willing? Are you able to come on the Inside Out Leadership podcast? I was excited like I was a little kid, because you become a good friend. There's so much I've learned from you, but there continues to be so much I learn from you as well. And then I started to do a deeper dive on your book, and I knew that we would have a conversation about it where I could learn even that much more. So I just say thank you for the extraordinary work that you are doing, but thank you more importantly for who you are, because you rub off on me, brother, in ways that you don't even know. And I know not only in this particular conversation I'm benefiting, but all the listeners and those viewing as well are benefiting too. So for that, I say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Where can we find out more about Steve Robertson? You got to let people know. Where can we buy the book? Is there a website? I'm sure it's available in most stores all around the world. So let us in on where we can buy the book and where we can find you.
Thank you, Rob. I probably Amazon is the best place to find the book. Turns out that there's a number of books that are in the Aliens Among Us space. So you probably need to say Aliens Among Us Gen Z to find it. if you want to find out more, there's a link also on my website, Stephen with an Steven with a J, Stephen J. Robertson. Stephen Robertson wasn't available. I didn't mean to put my middle name in there. Okay, StephenJRobertson.com. My mother always calls me Stephen John when I'm in trouble, as you can imagine. And there's some more information there that I'm thrilled. I would be thrilled if anybody felt like they wouldn't wanted to read it. My heart is to share. And I'm so excited that you've been so open to just even listening to a different perspective, because I think that's where it begins.
Yeah, I can't imagine you, your mom needing to say your full name too often when you were younger, Steve. That's all. I can't picture you being in trouble more than a few times, but maybe that's a topic of another conversation and another interview for us.
Indeed.
Do you know what we're going to call it? Stephen Rob's Confessions.
The phases that we went through in life. There's many.
There we go. To reach all generations of all times. Thank you so much, my friend. I look forward to the next conversation. And that's all for now. Until next time, y'all. For Steve Robertson, I'm Rob Holman. We hope you enjoyed our time with us. Bye.